ever think about how what you eat could impact, like, your spiritual standing?
Interesting.
A pretty intense concept, right? But that's what we're getting into today.
Okay.
We're taking a deep dive into Leviticus chapter 17.
Oh, interesting.
All about the rules surrounding blood and sacrifice and why it was such a big deal for the Israelites and the foreigners living among them.
Gotcha.
We're using this online study from My Christian Space as our guide.
Okay, cool.
And getting ready to unpack some serious ancient food rules with a spiritual twist.
Sounds fascinating. I mean, it's easy to dismiss these rules as just, some kind of ancient dietary restrictions.
Right, exactly.
But when you dig a little deeper,
Yeah.
you realize they were so deeply intertwined with their whole belief system.
Totally.
About life, death, and the divine.
Absolutely.
It's not just about what they were eating, but what that act actually represented in their worldview.
Okay, so let's jump right in. Leviticus 17, right off the bat, gets super specific about where sacrifices can happen.
Okay.
Only at the entrance to the tent of meeting. No backyard barbecues for these folks.
Definitely not. And that seemingly minor detail, right?
Yeah.
It actually speaks volumes about this, cultural and religious shift that was happening at the time.
Totally.
Remember, this was a time when people worshipped all sorts of gods and spirits.
Right.
So centralizing that sacrificial location wasn't just about logistics. It was a power move, right?
Okay. Yeah.
It was reinforcing this idea of one God,
Okay.
one community,
Yeah.
one central point of connection with the divine.
Like saying, this is how we do things now.
Exactly.
We're not scattered anymore. We're unified.
Right.
But then it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
Because the text compares sacrificing in the wrong place to prostituting themselves before goat demons.
Whoa.
That's intense language.
It is intense, right?
Yeah.
But that intensity really underscores how seriously they took this stuff.
Right.
Back then, sacrificing to another deity, like another god, was seen as the ultimate betrayal of their covenant with God. It was spiritual adultery.
Right.
Like you were choosing another lover over God.
Okay, that puts it in perspective. So this permanent regulation, as our source calls it,
Yes.
how does that apply to us today? Like, is it about avoiding literal demons?
No.
Or is there some, deeper takeaway for those of us who haven't exactly encountered a goat demon lately?
It's a really good question, and it forces us to think about how we're interpreting these ancient texts, right?
Right.
Maybe it's not about literal demons in the modern world.
Okay.
But think about it this way.
Yeah.
What are the things that tempt us to stray from our core values today? What pulls us away from our own sacred spaces?
Yeah.
Whether that's like an actual place of worship, a community,
Right.
or even just our personal principles,
So it's about staying true to that spiritual center.
Whatever that looks like for you.
Yes.
Don't prostitute yourself before the,
Right.
metaphorical goat demons of
Yeah.
distraction or compromise.
Totally.
Okay, but let's get to the real heart of this chapter.
Okay.
The blood itself.
Yeah.
Leviticus 17 says over and over, the life of the creature is in the blood.
Right.
And it was given for atonement.
Yeah, and that's not just some random ancient belief.
Right.
Blood held this immense sacredness in cultures all over the world. It represented the very essence of being.
Yeah.
So sacrificing it, giving that blood back, was seen as the ultimate act of giving that life force back to God.
Right.
It wasn't something you did casually.
It's fascinating, though, how universal that symbolism seems to be.
It really is.
And it wasn't just about the big sacrifices either.
Right.
There's this detail in Leviticus that always gets me.
Okay.
Even when they were hunting just for food, they had to pour out the blood.
And cover it with earth. It's like they were acknowledging the sanctity of life, even in animals they were going to eat.
It really speaks to a level of awareness and respect, I think, that we've kind of lost touch with.
For sure.
They weren't just grabbing a burger.
Right.
They were actively acknowledging the life that was given to sustain them.
It makes you think about where we've lost that sense of reverence. Right?
It really does.
Most of us don't think twice about grabbing a steak at the grocery store.
Yeah, totally.
But for them, every act related to blood was imbued with this profound spiritual significance.
Absolutely.
And it gets even more intense when you think about the rules surrounding animals that died naturally or were torn by beasts. Those couldn't be eaten at all.
Right.
And anyone who touched them became ritually unclean.
So now we're not just talking about respecting life.
Right.
Now it's about this concept of purity and contamination.
Right. Yeah, what was that all about?
Well, remember, this is all part of a larger framework, right?
Okay.
A framework of spiritual order and balance.
Okay.
And an animal that wasn't killed in this, ritualistic, controlled way, it was considered to be outside of that order.
So, it disrupted that natural flow of life and death.
Yeah, disruptive to the natural flow of life and death.
And by consuming it, you were somehow taking on that disruption.
Exactly.
That impurity.
Yeah, it's almost like absorbing the bad vibes,
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
So by maintaining these strict rules about blood and sacrifice, they were striving to maintain that spiritual harmony, right?
Absolutely.
That alignment with the divine.
Exactly.
Okay, I think we've covered a lot already.
Oh, yeah.
But there's still so much more to explore.
For sure.
I mean, we've got blood as this potent symbol of life, the importance of centralized worship, this whole idea of spiritual purity.
Yeah.
But I want to dig even deeper into why eating blood was such a taboo.
Yeah. What was it about that specific act that held so much weight?
You're asking the right questions.
And that's exactly where we'll pick up after a quick break.
Sounds good. It's really striking how much emphasis there is on blood not being eaten.
Yeah, for sure.
This wasn't just avoiding certain foods.
Right.
It was this deeply symbolic act.
Yeah.
With far-reaching implications.
And it wasn't just for the Israelites, right? The text makes it clear that these rules applied to the foreigners living among them too.
Yeah.
Everyone had to be on board with this.
Right.
No matter their background.
It really speaks to the universality they attributed to these principles, It wasn't about being exclusive, but about recognizing the sanctity of life.
Yeah.
Something that transcended cultural boundaries.
So eating blood was seen as, what?
Wow.
Like a disrespect for that life.
It could be seen as that.
A spiritual contamination.
Yeah, that too.
Let me connect the dots here. Remember, blood represented the essence of being, given to God for atonement.
Right.
So to consume, it could be interpreted as taking something that wasn't meant for us, like overstepping a boundary,
It's almost like they believed you were trying to take on the life force of the animal in a way that wasn't intended.
Yeah.
Kind of a spiritual power grab.
That's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that there's an order to things.
Okay.
A balance between life and death.
Okay.
And the respect that we owe to that balance.
I'm starting to see how all these seemingly random rules actually fit together into a worldview.
Yeah.
But I gotta be honest, some of the stuff feels pretty removed from our modern sensibilities.
I get it.
Do we really need to worry about spilling a little blood today?
Well, I don't think we need to obsess over every drop.
Right.
But I do think there's a valuable lesson here about mindfulness.
Okay.
Yeah. The Israelites were constantly reminded of the sacredness of life and everything they did.
Right.
Even in how they prepared their food.
So maybe it's less about literal blood.
Yeah.
And more about recognizing what we consider sacred.
Exactly.
What do we treat with reverence and respect?
It's about asking ourselves, what are those core values? What do we hold dear?
Yeah.
And how do our actions really reflect those beliefs?
That's a big question.
It is.
One we should all wrestle with.
For sure.
But there's one piece of this puzzle I'm still struggling with.
Okay.
The text mentions that eating an animal that died naturally or was torn by beasts, that made someone ritually unclean.
Right.
What was that about?
That's a fascinating one.
Yeah.
Remember, it's all about purity and recognizing that proper order of things. So an animal that wasn't killed in that ritualistic, controlled way that was considered outside of that order.
So it's almost like it disrupted that natural flow of life and death.
It did.
And by consuming the animal, you were taking that on.
Yeah, you were taking on that disruption, that impurity.
Okay.
It was about maintaining that spiritual balance, that harmony with the divine order.
Okay, I think I'm getting it.
Got
I'm starting to grasp this, the deeper meaning behind all these rules.
Okay.
But I gotta admit, I'm still a little fuzzy on the whole unclean until evening thing.
Yeah.
What was the deal with that time frame?
Well, the concept of ritual purity and impurity.
Yeah.
That was central to ancient Israel.
Right.
And remember, it wasn't about hygiene the way we think about it.
Right.
It was about spiritual alignment.
Okay, so it was like a temporary state of being out of sync with that divine order.
Exactly.
But why evening specifically?
Well, that's where things get really symbolic.
Okay.
Evening, it marked that transition between day and night, light and dark.
Oh, okay.
It was a time of liminality, of crossing a threshold.
So by waiting until evening,
yes,
they were symbolically allowing that period of impurity to pass.
Right.
To be cleansed by the transition to a new day.
Exactly. It's like this beautiful metaphor, right?
Yeah.
For how we can move through difficult or challenging experiences.
Yeah.
We can allow time and ritual to help us regain that balance, a sense of wholeness.
Wow, there's so much depth to all this.
Oh, I know, right?
Packed into these seemingly simple rules.
Yeah.
We've covered so much today.
Yeah, we have.
But I feel like we've only just scratched the surface of this chapter of Leviticus.
Totally. You're absolutely right. There's always more to explore, more to uncover.
For sure.
But I think we've laid a solid foundation for understanding the spiritual significance of blood and its proper handling in ancient Israel.
And we've also uncovered some intriguing parallels to our own lives and beliefs.
Absolutely.
Even if we don't follow these rituals today.
It's all about connecting those ancient wisdom teachings to our modern context. Finding those timeless truths, that resonate across cultures and centuries.
So as we move into the final part of our deep dive, let's shift gears a bit and explore how some of these seemingly archaic ideas about blood might actually be more relevant to our modern lives than we realize. Because believe it or not, this ancient taboo has some surprising modern-day echoes. All right, so we've spent a lot of time on the why behind the blood rules in Leviticus.
We have.
But before we finish up, I think it's good to do a quick recap of the what? Sure. Just so we're all on the same page. Okay, so no eating blood. That's the big one, obviously.
The main takeaway.
But what if you, accidentally came into contact with it? Say you tripped and fell into a puddle of, you get the picture.
Okay, yeah.
That's where those purification rituals come in.
Right, exactly.
And it's fascinating how detailed they were about the cleansing process. Like washing your clothes, bathing, waiting until evening. This wasn't just about physical hygiene.
No.
It was about restoring that spiritual harmony.
Exactly.
Realigning yourself with the divine order.
It was all about that spiritual state.
And this applied to everyone, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Whether you were an Israelite or just a foreigner passing through.
It didn't matter.
These weren't just cultural quirks. This was about universal principles.
Yeah, connecting to the essence of life itself.
Okay, so I think we've got the key points from Leviticus 17.
I think so.
But the big question is, what does all this mean for us today?
Right.
Most of us aren't sacrificing animals these days.
Not usually, no.
And I haven't seen any goat demons lately.
Hopefully not.
So how do we bridge that gap, between this ancient text and our modern lives?
Well, that's where the real work begins.
Okay.
We have to translate these ancient teachings into modern-day relevance.
So it's not about following the rules literally, but more about taking those principles and applying them to our lives now.
Exactly.
So instead of worrying about ritual purity, maybe it's more about being mindful of what we consume.
Yeah, I like that.
Not just food, but mentally too.
Yes, totally.
Are we taking in things that nourish us or things that deplete us?
That's a great parallel.
Yeah.
It's like recognizing we're constantly taking stuff in, Information, ideas, experiences.
Yeah.
And it all affects us.
Yeah.
Just like the Israelites. We have to be choosy about what we let into our lives.
Into our own sacred spaces. And they centralize their worship.
Right.
Maybe we need to think about what our sacred spaces are.
I like that.
Those places, those practices or relationships that connect us to something bigger.
Absolutely.
And maybe that whole blood is life idea
can
remind us to treat all life with respect.
That's a good point.
Not just human life.
Right.
But animals, plants, the planet itself.
It's all connected.
So we've come to the end of our Leviticus deep dive.
We have.
I think we found some pretty amazing insights.
I agree.
That go way beyond just ancient rituals,
Way beyond.
We explored the symbolism of blood.
Yeah.
The importance of spiritual alignment. The power of ritual.
For sure.
But the most important thing is that these ancient teachings can still speak to us today.
If we're listening.
If we're willing to listen.
Exactly.
So as you go about your day,
I
want you to consider this.
All right.
If blood symbolized life back then,
right,
what's its modern equivalent? What do we hold sacred?
Good question.
And are we honoring those things in our everyday lives?
Powerful questions.
Maybe by looking at these old texts, we can understand ourselves better and our place in the world.
That's the goal.
So keep exploring, keep questioning.
Yes.
Keep that curiosity alive.
Absolutely.